Well, it was hardly surprising that job cuts should dominate federal parliament today, and the government's bracing for more. The opposition blames losses in manufacturing on the carbon tax, and the Prime Minister says the coalition is talking down the economy. Political editor Heather Hewitt reports.
Got a young family. It's got two little boys under the age of 3.
You've come with an important message.
What we're listening to now came as a bit of a shock to our families.
With job losses in the manufacturing sector hitting the headlines on an all too regular basis, there's almost a revolving door now to the Prime Minister's office. Last week it was the car manufacturers. This morning it was a group of workers and union leaders worried about Alcoa's review of operations at its aluminium smelter near Geelong.
So many young guys down there with young kids and families, and that they're all pretty nervous as to what they may or may not happen into the future.
The government knows the high Australian dollar means there'll be more job losses in the sector, and it somehow has to manage this. So do union leaders.
We had a very tough end of last year. We've seen almost 44,000 jobs out of the manufacturing industry in recent months. I'm envisaging this year to get worse because we are seeing no sign of the dollar going down anytime soon. Frankly, the Reserve Bank keeping interest rates on hold was a real kick in the guts to Australian manufacturing.
Union reps today had this message for the government.
Whilst the dollar remains abnormally high as it is, it's going to be very tough. And I think politicians need to accept and start being honest with the Australian people and saying a high Australian dollar is not a good thing. It's not something we should be proud of. It's not something that we should be happy about. This is devastating for manufacturing, but it's also devastating for services, it's devastating for higher education, it's devastating for retail.
While unions claim they haven't come with a wish list, they clearly want assistance. The government makes sympathetic noises and has handed out to the car industry, but it can't hand out to every sector and every company facing trouble and blaming the high Aussie dollar. That's why there's so much government talk of adapting to a new economy and a ministerial team effort in the Parliament today to try to counter this continuing line of attack from the opposition.
Why is the Prime Minister introducing the world's biggest carbon tax when the government's own advice shows that it will destroy an industry, cost jobs and hurt struggling communities?
I had the opportunity earlier today to meet with some workers from Alcoa who of course represent hundreds of others. They understand that the high Australian dollar is making a big difference to their business, a big pressure on them, a big pressure on their shoulders. They understand too, Mr Speaker, that we are seeing low prices around the world for aluminium.
Why is the Prime Minister proceeding with a carbon tax when the government's own modelling says that it will reduce the industry's output by 61.7%?
The Leader of the National Party is misusing the modelling completely. He is ascribing a cause and effect here which the modelling does not. A continuing part of the opposition's fear campaign on carbon pricing. And what the truth is for this industry is we are seeing a high Australian dollar with all of the pressure that that brings to bear.
The government, by the way, had lined up a steady stream of Dorothy Dix questions from Labor backbenchers to defend its economic record and try to stem any damage inflicted by the opposition. Here's a typical example.
How is the government promoting jobs across Australian industry? And what are the risks to the government's support?
Labor always puts jobs and economic growth as a priority in its economic policy settings. The government, of course, is focusing on making the economic circumstances good for business investment and boosting jobs. We're making record investments in skills and education.
It's an approach the government will stick to. What's not so predictable is how Labor and Liberal members will deal with same-sex marriage legislation introduced in the House of Reps this morning. As part of a compromise deal brokered by Julia Gillard and factional supporters, Labor MPs will have a conscience vote.
If any bill on this matter is to be successful, it'll require more votes than can be mustered by any one party or the crossbenchers. The best chance of success is a bit of quiet diplomacy.
The chances of success are minimal. That's why Julia Gillard wanted the conscience vote. But there's continuing disquiet in Liberal ranks about why the opposition leader and his shadow cabinet have disallowed same-sex marriage as a conscience issue for Liberals.
I've said we shouldn't be afraid of a conscience vote because we are the party of a conscience vote.
Yet, for what's understood to be the first time in the history of the Parliament, Labor MPs get a conscience vote while Liberal MPs do not. Does that concern you?
Well, it's odd. It's odd, that's all.
What do you find odd about it?
Well, when Andrew Fisher set up the Labor Party, he said, we all go together, and if you don't, you're out. When Menzies set up the Liberal Party, he said there was a structure there that said if there is a matter of conscience within this party, you will be able to cross to the other side.
Liberal backbenchers can always defy the front bench and cross the floor, but the chances on this issue look unlikely.
Well, I would expect that backbenchers are not going to vote awry with the front bench. If your front bench is voting one way, your backbench is not going to vote a different way.
They have plenty of time to mull it over. The legislation is not expected to go to a vote until at least June.